Hey, how you guys doing? This is OV Moore with OV Ministries. So I was doing a little reading passage of scripture today, and I was looking at Isaiah 53, and this time I just kind of focused on verses for this particular time, and it was talking about. Let me read this passage to you. It says, "Surely He has bore our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed Him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted." And I also looked at, King James Version and the Hebrew National Version. I believe that's the whole pronunciation of it. And words a little bit different. On one portion it says grief, the other one it says sickness. Um, Looking at the New King James Version, it says, "Surely His bore our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed Him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted." And of course, when I look at the HNV, it says, "Surely He has bore our sickness and carried our sufferings, yet we consider Him plagued, struck by God, and afflicted." So that was literally three different versions that I looked at. And these are translations. Let me make sure I get that straight, because people are like, oh, you get the argument about, oh, he read from another Bible and all that stuff. These are translations, folks. Please, translations are very important, because although it may be a different way of saying a particular word or names, it's all pointing back to God. Now, that doesn't mean all translations are right, and some of them do need to do better job. But for me, I'm all about researching, exploring, understanding the deeper meaning. If you guys notice, I use ESV. That's my first one. The second one was New King James Version, and the third one obviously was Hebrew. Uh, and by doing that, I was able to, identify the different words. They both mean the same thing. Again, in nature of the subject, we can all agree that Jesus went through under suffering. And so sickness and grief, when we talk about that, we understand sickness and grief is both mental and physical, right? Sickness towards the body, grief obviously emotional. Now, given what he went through, and then also being afflicted, despised, and rejected, when you go on to verse 5 and 6, and then of course it talks about his physical suffering. So from verses 4, 6, 7 on down, I believe all the way to 10, if I remember correctly, you have where he's going. He grew up among us. He was indeed man, even though he was God too. He submitted to the Father. And then it goes to show how he experienced what we went through as a human. It shows what he went through during his torture, both mental and physical. And so why is this important? Why did the author put that in there? Because he wanted to show that he was going to go through tremendous sufferings. Okay, emotional. What does that look like? Emotional. Okay, let's look at what he went through. He was abandoned by the disciples, all but one. He was betrayed by the man who shared his bread, right? So not only was he a fellow Jew, he also was with them for 3 years, right? And not only was he betrayed by a man that was with him for 3 years, he was sold for money. You know what I'm saying? And obviously the enemy took an opportunity in that aspect. Okay, so so that's tough in itself. And then denial by one of the greatest disciples, which is Peter, obviously. Not that Peter was perfect, but he denied him at the worstest time. You know what I'm saying? And that in itself is just as bad as betrayal. You know what I'm saying? Because Peter was privy to be with Jesus, and he would be considered the inner circle, as it was. Now, when I say inner circle, just basically meaning that Jesus had groups of people that he was closer to than the others. You know what I'm saying? Peter, James, and John, which saw him transfigured, they would have known more about him personally. You know what I'm saying? Things that, Jesus revealed to them versus the disciples until much later on, right? Guys, forgive me for the glare because I'm out in the sun today. Um, okay, so then you have that, and then finally, well, there's several other things. Then you have what he was lied on in the court. It was what we call I don't know, we call it a kangaroo court. Basically, the lies were not even legitimate. They were made up, and I like how the Passion of the Cross, played by Jim Caviezel, directed by Mel Gibson, displayed even in that one of the people's like, basically this isn't even legit. You guys up in the middle of the night, so even that, and then finally condemned both by men and obviously condemned by God. And of course, if you guys don't believe that in Scripture, it says it pleased God to crush him, right? Okay, so what does that mean? Take a serious guess on that, right? Okay, so, and then of course finally condemned to die, obviously, right? So you have all these aspects, and then it goes into him being afflicted. So he was afflicted mentally, he was afflicted physically. And these issues hit us hard. When we're going through something, usually it starts with the mind, right? Okay, and then it affects what we do outwardly, right? So that's kind of how that works, right? Luckily, from the beginning, God knew what he was going to do. And it's not like any of this surprise, Jesus, because he knew that one was going to betray me, one was going to deny me, another was going to leave me, and people have rejected me. He knew all this, and he talked about this consistently, man. So he knew what was coming, but it's nothing like the reality of that hit while he was in the garden, okay? To the point to where it was so bad to where he's bleeding great drops of blood from his head. There's a scientific name of it, and people have tried to water it down as a description of his grief. And while that may be true, no doubt it was grief, and you see that in there. So when you look at all these translations, it compared to exactly what he went through: grief, sorrow, sickness, affliction, torment, mental, and then the physical aspect. While the physical aspect is obviously more grueling, the physical was just as bad because he was rejected after another, one after another, one after another, one after another, one after another. His people, his brethren, his family, his God. But yet, in spite of all that, why did he do that? And let me leave you with this. And get this, because people miss this. This is key important. First, he did this not only because God knew what he was going to do from the beginning. In Genesis 3, it talks about serpent striking his heel, but you'll bruise his head, okay? So God already knew this was going to happen, right? But then just as important, Christ was obedient first. After he was obedient to God, he knew what he was going to do and why he did it, right? And then the second thing, he did it out of love. He wanted to restore people back to him. But to walk in love and to be able to walk in love, first you have to be obedient. And people miss that because they think, love is the only thing to go by. People say, well, God is love. Yes, God is also holy and righteous too. Obedience is better than sacrifice. And for him to do a complete sacrifice, he had to be obedient first. That's the key thing, and most people miss that. And that's absolutely crucial. And if you notice in Scripture, when people were not obedient, what was the result? The result every time was devastating. You know what I'm saying? They did what they ought not do. But in Jesus' case, he had the opportunity in that garden because I'm telling you, the reality hit him. The prophecies, the Scripture, what he was going to do, it hit him. And yet he was still obedient because he says these key words: not my will, but your will be done. Man, I hope this hits somebody just to realize exactly what the cross means. Obedience, sacrifice, love. OV Ministries, Age of Grace, Inner Age. I'll talk to y'all later. Bye for now. Be blessed.